Well, Oregon's got a top 10 recruiting class from the true freshman ranks. How many of those guys could play this year? I think more than last. Here we go.
You are Locked On Ducks, your daily podcast on the Oregon Ducks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, it is that time once again for Locked On Ducks. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your number one source to stay up to date with the Ducks. Like, comment, subscribe, please, and thank you wherever you listen to or watch this show. And I'm joined today on Locked On Ducks by Max Torres. He covers Oregon for Fan Nation at Sports Illustrated. He's also host of the Ducks Dish podcast. Many of you know him. Those words were Ducks Dish. By the way, I'm trying to get my enunciation out there. I'm running on maybe 5.5 hours of sleep. Las Vegas with a buddy is a good time. You know, that's just kind of the way that we roll. But that's not going to stop me from bringing you the show that I'm so gracious that you all support. And Max, welcome back to the show, man. And I know you always love talking recruiting.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Spencer. Always a great time to hop on here and chop it up with you. And yeah, recruiting's where I try to live. So I'm stoked.
So last year we saw really just technically four true freshmen play meaningful snaps. Not only four true freshmen actually saw the field literally for the Ducks, but it was really just three guys that were a meaningful part of games, of wins, that were not starters per se, but were guys that saw the field regularly in important moments. Josh Connerly, Jaleel Florence, Jordan James, all of whom did, I think, fantastically in their roles. But I think this year, Max, you could see more true freshmen than that have an impact. What do you think?
Yeah, I would have to agree with you on that one for sure, Spencer. And I think part of it is because, if you just look at the basics, it's a higher rated class. This was Dan Lanning's first full cycle as a head coach in Eugene. So I think he definitely had some time, as did the rest of the staff, to kind of get their legs under them a little bit, learn how to approach recruiting in the Pac-12, learn how to leverage the advantages of the Oregon program, of the brand that clearly paid dividends. And I think that you just also see a lot of special guys in this class, right? You have numerous All-Americans scattered throughout this class, guys coming at positions of need. So I think this class did a really good job of filling holes. And I think another thing, obviously, we're going to talk about some of these true freshmen, but it's definitely worth a mention that there's a lot of these portal additions that are really going to help fill some of those needs for Dan Lanning in 2023. So I definitely think that they're going to see a fair amount of true freshmen that are going to be playing in this 2023 season. And that's a good sign, I think.
Yeah, I think it's also a familiarity component. I don't think a coach is quite as likely to play a true freshman, or he doesn't feel as inclined to do so, perhaps, when he did not recruit that particular player. And the discrepancy between portal and true freshman guys is very noteworthy, because you do expect, and the reason I wanted to talk about the true freshmen that could see the field in a significant way this year is we all expect the portal guys to be day one starters pretty much. Like, I think the only guy who maybe isn't a full-time, full-throated number one starter all the time could be Kyrie Jackson, probably Connor Soley as well. Like, those are guys that will almost certainly play, because that's why you add a transfer in most instances, because you have the anticipation that he is going to play. But the true freshman, it's a little bit more of a crapshoot, right? I was playing craps last night. It's really fun. But it's a little bit more of a crapshoot in that sense, because there are so many guys, and most true freshmen are not ready to play right away. But the one right off the bat, Max, that stands out, not just because of his recruiting profile, but also of the position he plays, is Mateo Uiagalelei, who I don't think he's going to be the only edge player that you see, play starters minutes on one side, and Jordan Birch will probably be on the other. But I do feel like that's the obvious choice. But I think for a reason, as you go down the list and say, okay, so which true freshmen are going to play the most? He stands out a lot to me.
Yeah, Mateo stands out for sure. As someone who's been able to see Mateo a lot, I was around Bosco a lot last year. he's a special talent. He's a guy who shows up, especially in those big games. He played some offense, primarily defense as a senior, but he played a little bit of both ways for the Braves. Most notably, he came in to play some tight end as the Braves were searching for that state title. Really big CIF Southern Section game against Mater Dei at the Rose Bowl. He came in and he had some huge plays. He had a touchdown grab. And then I think late in the game, he actually had a catch and run, kind of like similar to Jawan Johnson in that Oregon Rose Bowl against Wisconsin. He had that catch and run that really helped seal the game. So he shows up in the big moments. And I mean, especially Mater Dei. Mater Dei is one of those teams that obviously stands alone in that same territory as Bosco, but like they have a legitimate college size O line, and Mateo played some really good games against them as a senior. And part of the reason that he stands out is because of his frame and his technique, his just his violent hands. He's pretty polished, but it was kind of surprising to see him drop a little bit in the 247 rankings towards the end of the cycle. And I think part of it was just because of the consistency factor is I think what we saw, Biggins and some of those other, industry experts at 247, that's kind of what they were saying. And after watching him a couple times, I think I saw that. So I agree with you. I think he's going to be a guy that contributes a lot. But maybe kind of a similar transition like Kayvon Thibodeau, where he didn't start right off the bat, but gets his legs under him and kind of adjusts to that college level. And it's only going to help that he's there early already.
And he's the guy who is the most clear-cut choice to play right away, but he's not the only one. I think you could go on either side of the ball and find true freshmen who are going to play meaningful snaps. Like the 2022 class, you had three, really. It was Josh Connerly, it was Jalil Florence, it was Jordan James. I don't think there are any offensive linemen at the true freshman ranks because of the transfers they brought in that will see the field. And there also isn't a blue chip offensive line recruit in this class the way Connerly was, who's ready to just kind of slide in and start playing right away. Offensively, though, Max, I do think there are a couple, and we'll switch it back to defense at some point as well. But I think a guy who is going to have to play right away is Kenyon Sadiq, the tight end, who's got a lot of upside, is kind of that hybrid tight end receiver role. But Terrence Ferguson also played a lot of wide receiver in high school. He bulked up a little, and he's become now a really, really good clear-cut number one tight end. But you need at least two, if not three, guys who you can play consistently. You, of course, want to have depth in case injuries are there. I think Sadiq is someone else. Like those are two guys right off the bat who I think are regular rotation players from the moment the Ducks take the field against Portland State.
Yeah, Kenyon Sadiq's an interesting guy to look at. I actually just wrote about him last week in my signee spotlight series that I have going on over at Ducks Digest, a little selfless promo, but trying to look at each guy in this class, transfer portal guys included. But he's an interesting guy, right? 6'3", 220 pounds, not exactly your traditional tight end build right now. So it probably goes without saying that he needs to add some weight. And he's already enrolled at Oregon, which is a benefit as well. And like you mentioned, with the depth, he's going to have to see the field a little bit. He's more of he seems like he's definitely more of a pass catching tight end rather than a blocker, as you would think with his frame. But this is a guy who can take the top off of a defense. And I think he kind of flew under the radar a little bit because he was coming out of the state of Idaho, not exactly a state that's known for producing blue chip talent on a year in, year out basis. But I think you got to give some credit to the staff for going into Idaho and getting this guy. Just looking through his resume, he really saw his recruiting stock rise after a strong senior season. Ended up as one of the top commits, one of the top signees in Oregon's class from a ratings perspective, one of the top athletes in the country. He can take the top off of a defense, definitely has some good vertical speed, really strong hands, playmaking ability as well at the, high pointing the ball. I think there was a state semifinal game as his senior year, and he had 4 touchdowns for like 150 yards. So he's definitely that guy who had some takeover game breaking ability at the high school level, and he was someone that Skyline looked to as the guy on their offense. Also pitched in a little bit on defense as well, but I agree this is going to be an interesting guy to watch and someone who could and probably will need to see some meaningful snaps right away. And the only other point I would add, Spencer, is that from some of the people that I've talked to around the program, some sources, they're still hunting for a guy in the portal at tight end. So definitely keep an eye out there.
Yeah, not surprising. You can bet we'll keep talking about more true freshmen who could have an impact, and the Elite Terry hire that I want to ask Max about as well. You can't bet that at our friends over at FanDuel, but you can indeed get everything else you need. The midway point of the NBA season is here, and now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. New customers can get a no sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. I did wish at the tables last night that that was kind of an option, but apparently it's not how it works, or so I'm learning. But you can just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, it's super easy to use, and it is definitely secure too. You can bet everything from the money line to point scores, threes drain. They got all sorts of fun props or the more standard bets that you want to find on there. So don't miss the chance to get your no sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to fanduel.com/locked on. That's fanduel.com/locked on to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook betting partner of the NBA. So I think those are two names, Max, that come to Oregon this year, have an impact right away. I'm curious what Jurion Dickey's role could be, because you look at the receivers, and they brought in Tez Johnson, transfer, and they brought in Trayshawn Holden, transfer. Troy Franklin is there. You also have Kyler Casper waiting in the wings, who was a highly sought after recruit. Dickey is a little bit different on that front. I'm really, really high on him, but you have Chris Hudson in that room. I don't know if there are enough snaps, unless Dickey just absolutely starts killing it right away, for him to be a full-time player all the time. But that's another guy that I think sees meaningful snaps this year.
Yeah, Jurion is as good a receiver as you'll find in the country. He finished the 2023 cycle as the #2 rated guy behind only Zachariah Branch out of Las Vegas, Bishop Gorman, who is going to USC. And really, I talked to Cody DeCambra just about Zach Branch, and he was saying, because he's teammates with him at Gorman, he was saying, yeah, that speed is crazy, man. It's just not something that you see every day. So that's kind of his biggest trait. And I don't think Jurion will blow you away with his speed, but he's just such a complete wide receiver, and he's so physically imposing. And I think that the transition to college should be one that's fairly easy for him to make. I'm not going to go out and say that he's going to be a starter from right away, but he is that caliber of a guy. He is that polished that he should be able to compete from the second he steps on campus. Not sure if he's going to be here for spring ball or if it's going to be more of a traditional summer arrival. And that's another point too. So much of this class is already on campus, but Jurion is amazing. So I think that with him and the body of work that he had at the high school level, he showed up at the camp circuit and dominated, 7-on-7 circuit dominated. It is worth mentioning that he's working his way back from an injury right now. So he missed most of his senior season. I think he only played 3 or 4 games, but he's as good a receiver prospect as you'll find. And don't be surprised at all if he's in the mix right away. Kyler Casper, another interesting guy at that wide receiver spot, 6'6", 200 pounds. No one else has that height on that roster in that wide receiver room. And he has some serious athleticism. And I think he's someone that we could also keep an eye out for to make a jump. Maybe a little surprised that he didn't play last year, although the room was already really, really solid. But he's also a guy that reclassified, right? He got to college a whole year earlier than was maybe anticipated. So that's not an easy jump to make, but I'm excited to see what happens in that receiver room for sure.
And going back to the original thought that we talked about to begin the show, that there will be more than 3 true freshmen who see meaningful snaps as there were a year ago. That's 3. And we haven't even talked about the guys that I was discussing the same sort of topic yesterday with John Garcia, our Locked On Recruiting Insider. Dalen Austin, Roderick Pleasant. I don't know if Austin has as clear of a role to seeing the field in a meaningful way, because I don't know what he could bring to the table on special teams, but there are no surefire things in that defensive back room. There really aren't, other than maybe Tysheem Johnson and Evan Williams are both going to be starters. I think Triquez Bridges is probably a lock to start as well, but there could be opportunities. You go against pass-happy offenses, you may want to put four corners on the field. Like that may be what Dan Lanning and the defense with Tosh Lupoy at the helm want to do. But then you just keep going down and think, well, what else does this offensive, or what else does this 2023 recruiting class present? And we haven't even gotten to the strength when we've listed 3 guys who are probably going to see the field, and that's the defensive line, right? Other than Mateo. But there are other guys there that I think could have some opportunities to see the field because you don't have Jordan Riley there anymore. You do have Popo Amavai for sure. I think Sam Taimani did a lot of good things last year. I don't think his role is, 100% solidified. I mean, Keon Ware Hudson is in the mix, but I could see another edge player like a Blake Purchase or maybe someone like Tatum Tuioti pops, somebody like that. I think that's the other thing that gives me confidence there will be more than 3 true freshmen that play this year is there's always an element of the unknown, and you don't know all the time which of those true freshmen are actually going to pop.
Yeah, and I think that more of those guys are going to come on the defensive side of the ball that play right away, like you were talking about, because
Agree.
that's where more of the need is, right? So you lost a lot of production and some experience in that secondary with Gonzo leaving. I guess Gonzo's actually the only really main guy, so let me walk that back a little bit. But I think the only sure part of that defense right now is like the front seven, specifically the defensive line. You got Noah Sewell leaving, so you got to figure out how you're going to fill in. His departure looks like Justin Jacobs is probably going to be one of those guys, but I think there are just a lot of really high floor cornerback prospects in this class. And you made a good point about Roderick Pleasant adding that special teams value from day one. Dalen Austin definitely has more of that prototypical frame that Dan Lanning looks for in his cornerbacks. Those lengthy guys that have a lot of speed that you can hopefully put on an island and just have them lock down a whole side of the field. If he does see a lot of playing time as a true freshman, which I do think he's capable of seeing, he's going to be tested. They have some really, really good wide receivers in the Pac-12 and some really strong quarterback play. So Dalen Austin and Roderick Pleasant are two guys to watch for there without a doubt. Dalen Austin's probably looking like he's going to be on campus in time for spring football, from what I'm being told. Roderick Pleasant, not the case since he's a track guy. He's going to ride out his senior season with Sarah there. Hopefully going to make it out to some meets. But yeah, we have to talk about this defensive line group because there are a lot of special guys. I think one person that's certainly worth a mention is Johnny Bowens, late addition to that class relative to some of these other guys who was formerly committed to A&M. But, from the people that I've talked to on the program, they're super excited about him. I think just kind of monitoring what the jump looks like from a scheme standpoint and, making that transition from high school to college is going to be something that we could kind of keep our eye on there as far as Bowens seeing the field early or not. And then you also have Amari Washington, who I think is another guy that kind of flies under the radar in this class. I don't want to say that too much, but he's got that body type, 6'4", right about 3 bills that you just don't find out west. That's not to say that that's the only reason he should start, but when you're walking into that room and you're already the size more or less of a Popo Amavai, of a Sam Taimani, someone like that, like as a true freshman, you're gonna get some eyes on you, and I think that it's gonna help you see the field. I actually got to meet Amari Washington's coach when I was out in San Antonio at the Adidas All-American Bowl, and he was saying, this is like, it's crazy. He should be here, and maybe he's a little bit biased, but to get that high praise, like you were saying a couple episodes ago, from
It's high praise
from his coach, maybe he's a little bit biased, obviously, but yeah, he's a big name on that defensive line. And then you got Terrence Green and Ashton Porter was a dude who made a living in the backfield as a senior, Under Armour All-American there too. He's more of an edge guy, I think, around that 6'3", 260 area. But that's a loaded group too. And I think the best thing that you can maybe say about that is they don't necessarily need that help like desperately on the defensive line because they have a lot of proven production and returning guys. But that said, they still aren't at the level that they need to be. So you're adding all of these high-level, high-potential guys to a room with so much experience, which I think gives you some flexibility if you're Tony Tuioti, Dan Lanning, trying to find that right combination because you already have a lot of guys, Casey Rogers too, that are coming back that really, gave you some good play last year.
Yeah, I agree. And I think one thing to always consider when you're talking about playing time and who could see the field is don't think of it as 11 on offense and 11 on defense. It's a lot closer to, 18 on offense and 18 on defense, probably. Like if you're talking about realistic, yeah, like who's going to see the field at least in some capacity. And I think, as we talk about it, the interior of the defensive line does have a little bit more depth and experience than I was remembering, just because I forgot about Popo and him coming back, which could be a huge addition for the defense. But you mentioned something interesting. Ashton Porter was kind of a late riser in a way in this class, and he's really come on strong and looks really good. And John Garcia has come on this show and talked about how he feels like his floor is very, very high. If I told you right now who are Oregon's 4 edge players, right? The 2 starters and then the 2 guys that rotate in. You're probably looking Jordan Birch, probably Mace Funa on the other side. Mateo probably spells with Mace Funa, but then who's there to back up Birch? I mean, you can slide Dorless out from time to time, but
Oh,
I
but we
think
didn't even talk
Dorless
about
is
him. Yeah.
and I think Dorless is most effective on the interior, and that's where he will play more of this year because he just doesn't have the speed. He's a great pass rusher. He can line up a defensive end, but he doesn't have the speed to keep up with quarterbacks. He's more of a defensive tackle in that sense. So I felt like whenever he would get to the quarterback, it was really easy for mobile QBs to really break, contain, and get outside of him. But if you had someone like an Ashton Porter who's more of an edge player out there, or a Blake Purchase, or you can keep going down the list, I think that's an intriguing position to watch in terms of where true freshmen could realistically see action, because they've just added Birch at the edge position in terms of their defense. Like he is the only one, so they feel confident enough in the returners and the true freshmen coming in to know that they're going to have some depth at that position. And I think that's the other spot to watch, because the interior does have more bodies than you might think, but I think at the edge they're thinner than at other spots.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Just to acknowledge what you were saying about Porter. When Porter was getting recruited by Oregon, I remember I was talking to somebody and they were saying, I can't believe, this is someone on the staff, I'm obviously not going to name names, but they were saying, like, I can't believe that this guy doesn't have more attention, because he was formerly committed to Northwestern before he committed to Oregon. And then he was back on the market, so to speak, right? Uncommitted. And he didn't really have, some major offers. He had a top 5 of Houston, Mississippi State, Oregon was obviously in the mix there. Michigan State was another one. I think that this was an Oregon versus Michigan State battle, because Michigan State had sorry, there's a lot of noise right now. The garbage day was a couple days ago, but I guess they're still coming back to get some more stuff.
Well, I mean, when you
me.
throw massive house parties like Max is just renowned for, it adds up quickly, and you got to come clear it out, obviously.
No, but sorry, to hopefully that's a little bit not as crazy now. But yeah, that's just trying to back up what you were saying about Porter is a guy with a lot of upside. So I'm excited to see what he can do. But that like 2 deep with the edge is very interesting to look at. Because you had Trevin Mai, who was kind of an edge, but then he added a lot of weight and was kind of working a little bit more on the interior. Someone who played a decent amount last year, didn't really pop per se, but played a lot. Jake Shipley, I thought, was someone to maybe keep an eye on.
Played in the bowl game. Jake Shipley played a good amount in the bowl game.
Yeah, so I think he's a name that you can also maybe see play. He's listed at 6'3", 267, so maybe he's a little bit heavier than you'd want for an edge guy. But yeah, I think that 4th spot in that 2 deep at edge is where we could see maybe another true freshman play, because they just don't have a lot of guys on the roster that have done a whole lot, whether that be at Oregon or just at the college level. So that's another spot we definitely have to keep an eye on as we get into spring ball. And I'm excited to see kind of what that looks like in the spring game. Maybe that'll give us a little bit more of an idea of what they're working with in Tosh Lapoi's room.
Bro, I'm just waiting for the first practice report. I'm so curious to see how all this stuff plays out, especially on defense. I think offense is much more predictable. Sadiq and Dickey, I think, are wild cards in terms of the depth chart and playing time and snaps and receptions and all that sort of stuff. Like Troy Franklin's your clear number 1 receiver. T. Ferger is obviously your number 1 tight end. You know what the running back looks like. Quarterback. I think offensive line is fairly easy to project as well. Defensive line on the interior and on the edge, frankly, mostly simple. But then from there, just wild cards across the board.
Another thing that you got to keep in mind is they got 4 games to play with. So like they can play 4 games and still keep that red shirt.
Right.
Right. And look at how many backs touch the ball last year, even with all the rotations that they had there, a whole bunch. And Dante Dowdell, I'm sure he's going to get some run. I know that Jordan James is someone that is on a good track after seeing a lot of work as a true freshman. I'm pretty confident that he burned his red shirt, I want to say. So that running back room is solid, and if they're able to blow some teams out, that's where you get some of those 4 games come into play. Get those guys on the field, get them up to speed. But that's, I think, one of the biggest challenges that come with managing such a talented roster is you don't want to get guys in there too early. But I'm sure that those conversations have already been had, behind closed doors, just as far as, hey, here's your plan. Here's how we'll kind of work you in and get you acclimated. But this is an exciting roster. And then the last thing I was going to say on some of the true freshmen is, like, look at how long it took Troy Franklin to kind of really break out. He saw the field a lot in 2021, but maybe it was just the offense that they were playing in, and he really took off in 22.
I think he could have done more in
Sure.
2021. Not what he did this past year when he really made that sophomore leap, but I think he brought more to the table as a true freshman than he necessarily showed. And he was still an impact player, by the way. Like, he
Yeah.
was a rotational receiver out there, made a lot of big catches, had a couple against Ohio State even. Last thing, Max, the Alik Terry hire. I think it's intriguing because it's another young up-and-comer, which has been a theme with Dan Lanning and making these hires, whether it's Kenny Dillingham or Will Stein or Chris Hampton even. Now Alik Terry. Does it concern you at all that Lanning is almost exclusively all in on young coaches? And I don't want to say he's throwing caution to the wind by not bringing in a lot of veterans, but that he's just very determined, it seems, to make that a focal point for his staff?
No, I wouldn't say it's a concern for me. I think it makes a lot of sense just with the fact that he is a younger coach. Your coaching tree is only so expansive with your limited experience.
Right.
But Alik Terry is an exciting name, and he was the first name that I wanted to keep an eye on when this opening came about. He's someone that has familiarity with Eugene since he was a GA a couple years back when Oregon's offensive line was super dominant. I don't know how you want to compare last year with the Cristobal and Mirabal years, but he was last on the staff, and when he was working with an offensive line that had three All-Americans, I want to say, with Throckmorton, Panay, and Shane Lemieux. We obviously see what Panay is doing now, and that can't all be attributed to Alik Terry, but he knows what this offensive line, what an offensive line looks like in Eugene when it's operating at a high level. He was in that room. He was at those practices with Mirabal and Cristobal. So he knows that standard that he wants to meet. He's familiar with Eugene. He's going to know how to recruit to Eugene. He's run his own offensive line room before, even though it was only 1 year at Hawaii. I think that's obviously valuable experience to have. And he knows what NFL linemen look like, even though he was a defensive line assistant. I think that was maybe something that maybe caught people's eye when he got hired, is like, wait, we just hired a defensive line assistant coach to run the O-line, but played O-line at Wake Forest for 4 years. So he's got some really solid experience. And I think another thing, since we talked about recruiting, you got that upside there since he's a Miami, Florida native. Definitely a tough area to push into, but he's going to be one that helps them keep at least taking those shots with some of those top guys in the Sunshine State. So I'm super excited about the Alik Terry hire. I think it's going to be one that has a lot of upside for Dan Lanning, and I'm not discouraged, by the age by any means. I think this is a solid hire.
Yeah, I'm not either. It's just a curious trend that I wanted to ask you about, and I just think that it's very recruiting oriented. I think, to go after all these young coaches, because I think they have a greater propensity to kind of relate to young players, young athletes coming out of high school, or heck, even in the portal now. With that being such a huge component of it. Max, appreciate it as always, man. His name is Max Torres. He is at M Torres Sports on Twitter. If you didn't know already, he hosts the Ducks Dish podcast. He covers Oregon for Fan Nation and Sports Illustrated, and he's a regular guest here on the show, of course, which is his most important title, obviously. Thanks, Max.
Sure. Thanks for having me, Spencer. Appreciate the time.
Appreciate everyone listening. See you next time. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and go Ducks.